Hello, welcome back to our Young Adults Bible study in the book of Revelation. Today we're looking at Revelation chapter 4. This is a great chapter because we've just gotten through chapters 1, 2, and 3, which make up the introduction of Revelation and lead us into the content that follows. And so chapter 4 is the beginning of that content. And chapter 4 has many very powerful pictures and just draws us and focuses us on the throne of God. It's just a beautiful image and a beautiful chapter. Now that said, before we get into this study, if you have not had a chance yet to read chapter 4, please open up your Bible now, pause this video, and read Revelation chapter 4. Okay, assuming now that you've had a chance to read through Revelation chapter 4, we're going to delve into some of the observations that we talked about at our Young Adults Bible study on Sunday. Again, if you want the fullest effect of this study, I highly recommend attending our Young Adults group if you live in the area of Central Alberta. We do our Bible study every Sunday night. We have dinner together. We study through the book of Revelation, one chapter usually. And we follow that up with a hangout at my house in the game area. And we play board games, which is where I'm recording right now. So you're always welcome to come and join us. We invite anyone to come. Feel free to contact me if you're interested. And if you're from our community, and you probably already know where I live, so come on out. And that'll get your fullest effect, because in the time when we gather together in the living room to discuss, there is a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, a lot of questions are asked, and there's an open opportunity for you to ask questions while you're there. So I highly recommend engaging in that way. However, this is an opportunity for those who missed a week, or anyone who's watching online would like to kind of get an idea of what's in the book of Revelation from an exegetical point of view. I am happy to have you joining us in this video series and following along. If you have not watched the very first episode I put out on hermeneutics and the approach to Revelation and exegesis, I highly recommend you jump back, rewatch that video, or watch that video for the first time, and then come back to this one. It just talks about how we interpret Revelation, how we understand the book of Revelation, and sort of the key elements in the process of reading it well, rather than just reading it and then allowing ourselves to dictate what it's going to say. We learn how to read the text so it tells us what it's saying. That's very important for a scholarly read of any biblical text. Okay, so Revelation chapter 4, very interesting. We have to first pay attention to the very first couple of verses in Revelation chapter 4. The first few verses are a holy or divine summons, where John on the island of Patmos has introduced his message, and then he expresses the content of the message. And the content is this: God invites him into the throne room. What does it say here? In Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, right near the end, so the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." Come up here. So it's a summons into the heavenly realm, into the heavenly court, into the throne room of God. There's a number of very important observations we must make in this chapter. Now, of course, the first thing we always get drawn to in this chapter as we read through it is what's up with these creatures, these four living creatures, and what about the 24 elders? So the first question, of course, that was asked in our Sunday evening study was about these creatures and the elders. I want to quickly just make a point about a few things here. Firstly, the creatures are direct references out of Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 3, also Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 10. The imagery used to describe the 10 creatures would have caused the readers of this text to immediately think of Ezekiel and Isaiah and immediately equate these creatures with the cherubim and the seraphim that are always waiting on God in the earlier texts. And so this point of these living creatures in the description is to draw the reader to the picture of God's presence. God is present, and with him being present are always these four creatures. Now, the number 4 in the book of Revelation represents the earth, and so these creatures may represent the earth. They have faces of human, eagle, ox, and lion, which represents sort of 3 or 4 primary animal types, created things. The human, of course, being one creation, animals that are prey, or hunters, hunting animals, such as lions, of course, powerful, victorious, represent power a lot of the time. Oxen, herd animal, working animal that is tamed for human use. And the eagle, far-seeing, predator, but it's a bird. It flies, so it's a little bit unique. It's a bird of the air rather than a beast of the ground. And so there's something there maybe that these four creatures kind of they dwell with God at all times. They are we're going to find out that they're the worship leaders of heaven, and they may in some ways represent all of the earth. And in chapter 5 we're going to see more of that, where the whole earth takes part in the worship that is led by these creatures. So the creatures are always the first thing we focus on because they're kind of weird and they kind of stand out to us. And we get attracted to the sensational images in the book of Revelation. And while they would not have distracted the original readers, they certainly distract us today. So we need to recognize, we need to go beyond the sensational imagery that attracts our attention and gets us caught up in a fantastical, apocalyptic revelation. And focus beyond that to what's the point? Why is John drawing attention to these things? What picture is John painting? And so an observation that maybe you missed in reading chapter 4, an observation you may have missed is that every preposition in chapter 4 refocuses or redirects the attention of the reader to the throne of God. Every single time. And so we're constantly drawn back to the throne on which God is present and residing. And so the imagery that John makes of the courtroom of God, of God's throne room with the 24 elders and the 4 creatures and the worship and falling to the ground and worshiping, this all brings us focus towards the throne. It's painting the picture of his throne room and establishing the context for the whole rest of Revelation. For the whole rest of the book of Revelation, John is in the throne room of God. He is present there in this setting where worship is day and night, where the elders are representing the people of God, where God himself is present and victorious and in control and reigning on the throne. This is our context for chapter 4. So this is very important that we not get caught up in the sensationalism of the imagery and recognize that the imagery is designed to point us to God. The creatures themselves, in their worship, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who is and was and is to come. Or who was and is to come. And so they draw us back to God, to his holiness, to his greatness, to his separateness, his aboveness. They also worship him as creator near the end in verse 11. I had to lean into my paperwork there. In verse 11, they focus on the creatorhood of God. They focus in on God as creator, and that is why he is worthy of worship. At this point, he is worshipped for being creator. Now, of course, chapter 4 and 5, we cannot divorce the two. Chapters 4 and 5 are probably intended to be read together. Well, I mean, the whole book is probably meant to be read in a single read. Chapters 4 and 5 specifically are intrinsically linked because it's a continuation of the throne room. Now, I've split it up, and next week we'll be looking at chapter 5, but they really are linked. And so in chapter 4, we see God as creator, and that is why he's worshipped. In chapter 5, we're going to see him worshipped because he is worthy to open the scroll, and we're going to see that from another perspective. We'll get to that next week. So we recognize then that Revelation chapter 4 is about setting the tone and the image that we are in the throne room of God, that John is present in the throne room. God is on the throne, and around him is his court that makes this a kingly place, a place of honor and respect, of authority. That sets our context and tone. Okay. So with that in mind, we enter into the rest of the book of Revelation. Now, that basically sums up the point of Revelation chapter 4. I did want to point out as well, one of the observations was the colors. Why is God depicted in color? He's depicted in a variety of colors, depending on the translation you have. Jasper, emerald, carnelian. There may also be Sardis. There's other colors mentioned in different translations. Generally, it's basically a rainbow of colors, yellows, greens, reds, blues, that encircle the throne and represent God. it was talked about in our group that perhaps the reason John used this color system was because there was no better way to describe the glory and presence of God. If God is light, and then light and color is the best way to describe his appearance. And that's very possible that that is the case. Another suggestion would be that this is John's way of avoiding breaking the second commandment. See, the second commandment says you're not to have any idols or worship any idols. So it was practiced in Jewish culture that any image of God, even if it was of the correct God, was not to be worshipped. This refers as well to things like the Ark of the Covenant. You weren't to worship the Ark of the Covenant. You were to worship the presence of God that rested on the Ark. We were not to make any image of God in any way. It's not by accident that we do not have any early pictures, written descriptions, paintings, or anything else of Jesus' appearance. Because to depict God in any form was considered idolatry. And I think, in all fairness, there's space for that even today to be argued that way. Now, that led into a discussion in our group about iconography, the worship of icons, and the use of icons in church practice. Great discussion. We're not going to go into that in this video. Again, those kind of discussions are really great to have in the small group setting. What we do have here is John describing God in a number of images, colors, in order to give us the image that God is present and yet not a specific form but for us to worship in the nature and character of God. Secondly, we also see in this section God reveals himself through a theophany. So on the throne are all these colors, and then there are rumblings of thunder and lightning and earthquakes. So throughout the book of Revelation, we're going to experience a number of theophanies, moments where God is present, noticeably present. God marks his presence in various events marked in the book of Revelation. And so we are going to be looking for those theophanies, and they are most often marked by the presence of thunder, lightning, earthquakes. They are also occasionally marked by pillars of cloud or pillars of fire. And that, of course, draws our attention back to Exodus. So we need to be looking for those theophanies as we go through and see where God reveals himself as present. The most notable of those places as we get to them will be at the seventh seal, the seventh trumpet, the seventh bowl, the seventh thunder. At the end of each of the judgments, God appears in a theophany and reveals himself. And so we have that first theophany happening here in chapter 4. God is present in the throne room, on the throne, and we are given some of the indicators of his presence. So that's also very important. We finally had a question asked at the end of this process of kind of the exegesis that we've just done, where someone asked in our group, sort of, what's the point of all of this? And what does this matter for today? Does the eschaton have any value? Firstly, let me define the eschaton. Refer to the eschaton as the final end event. The eschaton is, in Revelation, the moment in which judgment occurs, Revelation chapter 20, the opening of the books and the judgment, by the destruction of the old Jerusalem and the coming of the new Jerusalem, the new city, the city of God. And so with that is the eschaton, that end times picture, the final day, the coming of God, establishment of the new earth and the new heaven and the new creation. That's the eschaton. So somebody asked, well, this is pointing towards the eternal. This whole chapter points towards the eternal view, the heavenly perspective. We're in the eternal realm. And so what does this matter for us today? And so I want to end with this in this video, that the point of Revelation is to call us to live today with an eye on eternity, to recognize the already of today, the current, the present, where we are, and yet the not yet fulfilledness of God's final revelation, or final eschaton is the correct word there. It's marking the contrast between we live today in God's kingdom, establishing his kingdom on this earth, fully redeemed and yet not fully in realization of our redemption. We still experience sin and temptation and corruption. We are not yet made whole or perfect. We are incomplete today. And yet we have the promise of salvation. We have the promise of the future eschaton, the future heavenly realm, the future eternity that God has promised us. And it is already present in the eternal, and yet it is not present in the temporal. And so the book of Revelation is to draw our attention to the eternal so that we might live today effectively, motivated by that which is promised. This is the source of our hope, that which is within us that drives us to establish his kingdom today. Not to make heaven come sooner, not to make judgment day sooner by converting more people, but rather to see the world reach for his kingdom because we see the eternal hope of it. Because we see the end goal. We have an eye on the eternal scheme. And so Revelation chapter 4 draws the two together. John is brought into the throne room of God. He comes up into that place. And yet the message is still delivered to the 7 churches. It might be changed and transformed by the message in that time, in that day. The same way we receive this message to be transformed by it and how we live today, despite the eternality of the message, the heavenliness of it. It draws our attention upward, but drives us forward day by day to live each day for God's kingdom as part of his family. So that's my summary of the book, or of chapter 4 of the book of Revelation in our Young Adults Bible study. Did I miss something? Do you have any questions, feedback, pushback, insight? Please feel free to take part in a conversation in the comments below.